the language of Islam, used by both this cast of characters we're talking about, but also the terrorists, are identical in that they're abusing language because of its evocative content. So the guy who gets up on the plane and says Allah whatever and then blows the plane up is not making a statement about his faith. What he's really doing is making a statement saying, I really hate you guys, or I'm really angry, or I'm really upset, or it might be, I'm mad at my dad. I mean, we could psychoanalyze what he's doing. But similarly, the guys who throw Wahhabi, or, I mean, I remember on the playground, people calling me names. I mean, they're calling names, and the name they choose to call is the name that has the most evocative reference. There was a time when I might have been called a Marxist, socialist, communist. Now I'm called a Wahhabi Hezbollah. Basically, it's a way of taunting because the word has evocative content. Somebody says, Jesus Christ. They're not making a statement of faith. They're saying, I'm really mad right now. And that's the same thing that's going on here on both sides of this. And so I think we need to understand the use and abuse of language in this context, and understand that these guys who are throwing these names about, calling him Wahhabi or me, Hezbollah, the truth value of it means nothing. They're not concerned with that. They're looking in their dictionary of like, what's the worst word I can use right now? And I think I'll call him this. That'll work.
So you've already referred to the, I guess, like media appeal of moderation or of interfaith work and how that kind of doesn't necessarily play. And, you know, with psychological research that says that when you respond to somebody's argument, you almost solidify it in the opinions of the listener or the viewer. So what are we supposed to do if we can't refute their arguments, when we can't sell our moderation, when we can't sell our identities? What are Muslim Americans supposed to do?
Well, number one, we feel that, you know, there's a verse in the Quran that says, when it refers to hate, says the rhetoric of hate is like the scum on top of water, it will float away. But the good work that you do that is of substance will remain on earth, that will benefit humanity. So it just tells you, number one, ignore all the rhetoric, ignore all the noise. It will always happen. It's been happening from the beginning, and it continues to this day. So the good work, even though it's not sensational, even though it's not going to get the media today, the relationships that we are building is creating energy, is creating a movement for change. Because the people that we get to know, the Jim Zogbys, the Azizahs, the Reverend Ed Bacon, Rabbi Leonard Bierman, these are great people. Jeremy Ben-Ami of J Street. These are great Americans. And so we feel that that story of what we represent as an American group of people working for peace and justice will prevail eventually. God wants us all to be thinking leaders, not blind followers. I think that's the message that's very important that we have to stress for the thinking Muslim, the common Muslim.
Our belief is that there is no Muslim country now that is following Sharia law. And one good reason is because the very basics of the Islamic society, including the election of the head of state legitimately by the people, is not taking place. Where do you go from there? So I'm not standing here to defend any Muslim country, and I hope that within the United States I can be a better Muslim than I can in some of these Muslim countries. You called it benign Sharia law. It's like, you know, what did we do to it or for it to make it benign? I don't like that terminology. Our laws are humanitarian laws, equitable laws, etc. There is no attempt to make them more or less benign. The only issue is whether they are applied or not applied. And in fact, there is no Muslim country that applies it. There are tons of Muslim countries that claim that they are applying it. And they're using this to oppress their people. They're trying to tell the people that they're there and their laws are by divine will, so to speak. And we need to tell these people that this is not true. And divine will would want the will of the people to speak out.
Condemnations?
Oh, you know, it goes back to the question, you know, do you want to validate the accusation that Muslims don't speak out? And the fact is, we have spoken out at every instance. And it gets ridiculous how many times things keep coming up, to the point that we don't even know the cases that come up, whether they are actually valid or not. And the commission that the gentleman refers to, some of the commission leaders have questionable views in terms of religious freedom of Muslims in America. There was a report on that. So I don't want to get into the politics of that commission or the politics of that academy. But when it comes to anyone saying that we should be murdering Christians and Jews, we condemn that, and we denounce any groups that espouse those beliefs.
I want to add another term for you guys, which is moderate or modern Muslims, which I, as a Muslim, have trouble with, as if we have to add a word first before just saying Muslims in this country. And I would like your input on this, because unless you're not wearing a headscarf, or unless you don't go to mosque or unless you look cool, then you're a moderate Muslim. But if you're wearing a hijab, or you go to the mosque, or you're a practicing Muslim, then you don't qualify for that term. And the trouble with that is that we've seen some people in leadership position advocating that those are the people that we need to talk to, regardless if they were non-practicing Muslims or, not cool-looking Muslims. So I'd like to just hear your...
Well, I'd like to approach this label of modern Muslim in a different way, because I know my colleagues here will address your answer more to the point. But in Islam, there is nothing wrong with saying that somebody has interpreted Islam in accordance with the society they live in. In fact, it is a required effort that Muslim scholars, when they live in a society, say American or European or Iraqi or whatever, that they look into the circumstances of their society and then explain the rules and basic, the basic principles don't change, but the rules and the secondary laws in light of that society, so that when they are used and applied, they cause positive results and not negative ones. Because the general rule in Islam is that God, the lawmaker, made these laws in public interest and not against the public interest. So yes, there are scholars here, including myself, who are looking at the American society and who are trying to understand Islamic laws within the context of our society. And that is very traditional approach and accepted approach for what we do. What you're talking about is something more political, and I will let the others answer.
Yeah. First of all, the Quran says that it is God's will that you be a community of the middle way, of moderation. And that's directly out of the Quran. And the Prophet also warned against any kind of extremism, to the left or to the right, to stay in that middle way.
What we learned after 9/11 was that the measure of our patriotism was the degree to which we were true to the values of our country, and that we would, as we said, it became a cliche, we weren't going to let the terrorists win. Tragically, I'm reading the signs from those marches in New York. I'm listening to the rhetoric I'm hearing on some of the television and radio shows. I'm listening to what some of the political leaders, including presidential aspirants, are saying. And the terrorists won. They're winning this fight. And we're sounding in our country no better than extremists abroad. And the clash of civilization crowd on both sides are driving this debate. It is irresponsible. It is a shame. George Bush was right. And it is hurting our country, our image abroad, and it is hurting the very social fabric of who we are as a people.
I think you might agree with a very short sentence I will tell you, which does not relate only to issues of Muslims. But what I'd like to see is for politicians to put the interest of the country ahead of political interests. And that will serve us quite a lot.